right, everyone. For the penultimate talk we're giving today at this symposium, we have a paper that was authored by Dr. Ivo van der Graaff of the University of New Hampshire. He is, as I think John Clark mentioned, the chief supervising archaeologist for the field work, and he has, of recent years, concentrated his own excavations at Villa B. Unfortunately, Dr. van der Graaff was not able to travel to be with us today. He sends his regrets and thanks. But we're quite fortunate in that we have Dr. Nyla Muntasser, who is one of the senior project members and the editor of our publications, who is here and who kindly consented to assist Ivo by giving his paper. So the title of the paper is Reaching Before the Eruption, New Excavations at Oplontis. And I'd like to ask you to help me welcome Dr. Nyla Muntasser.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? I'm going to say a couple of things before I begin reading Ivo's paper. First of all, I'd like to thank Regina for instigating this and bringing us to this wonderful place. We thank you all for your collaboration and the excitement you have generated in relation to this project and this exhibition. And I want to thank Ivo for adding my name to his PowerPoint, because I am really only the mouthpiece. But in a way, this shows the generosity that has existed in the whole kind of culture of the Oplontis project, the way we collaborate, the way we are not possessive over information, the way we kind of appreciate each other's input. So with that said, I am speaking for Ivo entirely. It is all his research and all his writing. When we think about the eruption of Vesuvius in AD 79, the first thing that springs to mind are the images of Pompeii and Herculaneum, that is, entire cities frozen in time by the catastrophic events of that fateful day. For centuries, excavators have focused mainly on these towns. Yet the eruption also destroyed most of the Roman countryside. A few excavated sites and the testimony of ancient writers tell us that the Bay of Naples was once the playground of the Roman elite, who built luxurious villas there to escape the chaos of Rome. Writing just a few decades before the eruption, the Greek geographer Strabo described it as follows. And the whole gulf is garnished in part by the cities which I have just mentioned, and in part by the residences and plantations which, since they intervene in unbroken succession, present the appearance of a single city. Strabo's description echoes the urban conglomerate that sprawls over the coast today, as you see here and also as you saw in Giovanni's images. Beneath it and the volcanic debris of AD 79 lies the ancient countryside, a landscape that remains little understood, with the exception of a handful of excavated sites. We know little about the settlement pattern and its relationship to urban centers, such as Pompeii and Herculaneum. We know even less about its development in the preceding centuries, a critical period of expansion, development, and social turmoil as Rome gained its empire. Sites such as Villa A and Villa B at Oplontis are among the few windows on the ancient landscape. However, like Pompeii and Herculaneum, excavations at Oplontis have not reached beyond the level of AD 79. This single disaster that has captured the imagination of generations has, to a certain extent, also impeded further archaeological investigations. Since 2006, our project has conducted subsurface investigations to study the development of Oplontis, first covering Villa A and then Villa B, or Oplontis B, where our studies are ongoing. The aim of this presentation is to synthesize the main results of our campaigns of excavation to offer a glimpse on how the complexes developed in the centuries prior to the eruption. Located roughly 5 kilometers west of Pompeii and about 300 meters apart, the sites of Villa A and Oplontis B are almost near opposites. hinting at the checkered occupation pattern of residences and plantations that Strabo describes. Villa A is a luxury dwelling. As it stands, the site is a collection of 99 spaces, which we estimate represent about half of the original building. A roughly color-coded model, as roughly color-coded on this plan, the building included a series of designated spaces and amenities. In blue, you see the private baths and a pool. Orange demarcates the slave quarters, whereas the red sections indicate the elegant reception areas and dining rooms fit for an imperial villa. By contrast, Oplontis B is a variety of separate buildings excavated around a two-story courtyard dedicated to the commerce of wine. As marked in yellow on this plan, the north side of the site preserves the remains of 4 two-story townhouses that lined a street. On the south side, colored in green, we find a series of barrel-vaulted storage spaces, whereas the western edge, marked in blue, preserves a partially excavated and separate two-story building. On the eastern side, our surveys have recovered evidence for a buried road that connected the site with the sea and the hinterland. The picture suggests that Villa B was not a villa at all, but rather an ancient settlement, perhaps Oplontis itself, or a suburb of Pompeii. In fact, the only commonalities that these sites share, besides their destruction by Vesuvius, are the challenges that they pose for research. Both were previously and only partially excavated, both are barely published, both are located in a heavily urbanized area, and both are largely rebuilt. Excavators first detected the remains of Villa A at the turn of the 17th century while digging the Sarno Canal, built to supply the mills in the town of Torre Annunziata with fresh water. In the 1830s, the Bourbon monarchs of the Kingdom of Naples began excavating a series of tunnels in the treasure hunt that had limited success. The main excavations only began over a century later in the 1960s and continued for a few decades. This was a complex operation of excavation, recovery, and reconstruction, which heavily influenced what we see today. Think of it as any of the major disaster zones one sees on the news, with collapsed ceilings and walls, all of which buried beneath 9 meters, roughly 30 feet, of solidified ash and volcanic debris. The task required heavy machinery and tools, far removed from the usual images of archaeologists wielding dustpans and toothbrushes. At the same time, the Italian state decided to rebuild the complex, resulting in what we see today, largely a new structure that resembles the original. Despite these efforts of excavation and reconstruction, the structure that we can visit is only about 1/3 a part of the original complex. Since we began the excavation component of our project, we have endeavored to find more of the structure and to establish its original setting. For this, we have applied a variety of survey techniques, some more successful than others. For instance, we began with a magnetometry survey that was unsuccessful. This particular technique produces a picture of the subsoil by measuring differences in its magnetism. Unfortunately, the iron bars used in the reinforced concrete of the restored building gave us too much interference, skewing our results into unreadable data. Other techniques, such as ground-penetrating radar and electrical resistivity tomography, proved more successful. They enabled us to identify an area with a high archaeological potential to the south of the Sarno Canal. Further deep coring and survey then enabled geologist Giovanni Di Maio, whom you just heard talking, to reconstruct the ancient coastline and locate our structures on that shore. Oplontis B lay close to the sea level, whereas Villa A, by contrast, sat on a 13-meter tall cliff edge. For Villa A, our discoveries have spurred new excavations, led by Federico Giletti and the Superintendency of Pompeii, that are uncovering the remains of collapsed terraces on the sea facade of the villa built to exploit the views of the Bay of Naples. By digging 42 trenches over 9 seasons, we have tracked the history of our sites spanning some 230 years. For Villa A, if we follow the layout of the second-style wall frescoes, then Atrium 5, Peristyle 32, and the rooms to the west form the first core of the complex, built in the mid-1st century BC, about 130 years before the eruption. It is likely, and that's the area outlined in pink, it is likely that a vanished portico in the north garden, marked on this plan in yellow, also belonged to this phase, before workers demolished it to make way for the current east wing. In 2009, we recovered a small triangular cistern along the portico's foundation that once collected rainwater from its roof. Inside were large pieces of demolition debris, including chunks of columns and complete antefixes. We were able to show that these antefixes are of the same type as those that ornamented neighboring porticos 33 and 34 at the time of the eruption. The results propose an unexpected building plan for the villa's first phase, one that featured a portico oriented onto the north garden rather than the current east wing. In a second phase, dating to the turn of the 1st century AD, engineers built an aqueduct to provide the villa with running water. It served new baths in rooms 8 and 18 and a series of water features in the gardens. Excavations in the north garden revealed parts of a water canal fed by a channel coming into the grounds from the northwest. Unfortunately, we were only able to find a very small section of what must have been a much larger feature. The canal curved away from the main building and continued into an unexcavated portion of the garden to the north. Our results indicate that the channel was open to the air in antiquity, suggesting that it functioned as an ornamental garden feature. We uncovered further evidence of previous water features in Garden Space 20. Here, our excavation recovered the remains of a large circular concrete water basin that had its sides broken off after it was abandoned in antiquity. Although heavily damaged, it still carried the slots used to anchor statues in place. In nearby Space 32, the so-called slave peristyle, trench OPK4 displayed evidence for at least 2 phases for the garden set within the courtyard. Although the garden did not change its function, the evidence indicates that the owner raised its level and added a fountain when the new aqueduct supplied the villa. Put together, the archaeology permits us to reconstruct a different setting for the villa, one where private baths and water displays added to its luxury in its second phase. The pursuit of further luxury marks the third phase, with the construction of the east wing in the mid-1st century AD. The architect demolished the previous portico and reoriented the focus 180 degrees from the north garden toward the pool and the new luxury pavilion. To the south, workers created an artificial terrace with demolition debris to define the basin's limit. Could you go? Yes, thank you. We were able to show that many fragments of painted plaster, stucco, and architectural elements came from the remodeling of rooms belonging to the older west wing. The most spectacular find of this kind was a fragment of the original third-style painted frieze from the baths in room 8 that had been hauled 100 meters across the villa and dumped into this trench. This fragment is part of the exhibit, by the way, and I encourage you to go and see it. The first version of the large pool did not last very long. Workers likely never completed the basin. This image shows how our excavation recovered evidence of two parallel pool walls. Our results indicate that engineers opted to reduce the pool's size by building the current western wall, which you see on the right. The new wall also extended out to the north and south of the basin to function as the foundations for spaces 97 and 78. Rather unexpectedly, we discovered that the intervening space, space 80, created by the facing pool walls, was partially waterproofed with the likely intent to create a secondary basin parallel to the main pool. For reasons that remain unclear, this project was never completed. Builders soon filled the space in with debris. In its final version, the pool basin reached over 60 by 70 by 2 meters. Such a massive basin required a large amount of water to fill. Our results suggest that engineers covered the fountains in the North Garden and Space 20 to redirect their water toward the pool. Soon thereafter, the earthquakes of AD 62 triggered a series of collapses that devastated the villa and led to its subsequent abandonment, this despite its recent redevelopment. Our work in Space 54 suggests that it was abandoned and never rebuilt. It was once a luxurious room complete with mosaics and a private raised garden. The excavation diaries mention that excavators recovered the space without what they call the usual debris of roof tile and building collapse, which they usually encounter elsewhere on the site. Clearly for them and for us, such an entry highlights an unusual situation. In order to understand these spaces better, we targeted the area with trench number 6. To our surprise, we recovered the remains of mosaics typical of the second style that had remained undocumented. Although badly battered, we were able to identify an ornamental band in the mosaics, known as a scendiletto that Tim talked about earlier, used as a functional divider to reserve a space for a bed. Such an arrangement is characteristic of bedrooms or rooms that are used with couches. Our work also confirmed that the adjacent space functioned as a private raised garden for this room. South of the pool, we documented the remains of two large luxury pavilions, spaces 86 and 99, overlooking the sea. In space 86, we encountered the remains of a fine floor composed of marble and slate that was rubbed out in antiquity for reuse elsewhere. Next to it, we recovered the remains of a space that was still undocumented, despite the fact that old excavation photographs already reveal its presence in the 1980s. The room featured a concrete floor that displayed a considerable slump and a large hole. On one corner, we encountered the foundations of a heart-shaped double column, whereas the north and east sides displayed two steps that allowed access to the garden. Our recovery of numerous bronze hooks and fragmentary marble revetment plaques decorated with a plant motif indicated that this was once a luxurious space which workers had stripped of its ornamentation before the eruption. If we turn to Oplontis B, the site shares a similar history in terms of its modern excavation, recovery, and reconstruction. Workers first detected the site by accident while coring foundation pylons for a future school, a middle school, I think. Work halted soon thereafter, and archaeologists, with the help of a construction company, excavated and rebuilt much of the site in the following decades. In the early 1990s, the money to rebuild the site ran out, and the complex has since languished in almost complete abandonment. We have taken it upon ourselves to record, study, and publish the site. The task at hand includes understanding the current site. That is, we need to figure out where the previous excavators had left off some 2.5 decades ago. Our team, composed of specialists, professional archaeologists, and the volunteers of the Kent Archaeological Field School, has reached for every available tool. Jess Galloway, Tim Lydell, who spoke earlier, and Marcus Abbott, whose photos you've seen before, have used conventional total station and laser scanning to map and digitally preserve the buildings. Jenny Muslin has led the effort to catalog the materials that were excavated together with the complex. Our excavations have similar aims: to clean and record the AD 79 level of the complex and to investigate its development prior to the eruption. So far, the results of our excavation indicate a superimposition of at least 3 phases, suggesting that the complex experienced sustained growth. In our opening season, we excavated an evaluation trench in the central courtyard aimed at documenting the AD 79 floor level. To give you a sense of the task at hand, we had to remove some 4 inches of modern accumulation and debris before we reached the ancient pavement. This debris is the result of natural accumulation, but also of the previous excavation and reconstruction process. The excavation photographs taken at the time indicate that it was common practice for workers to leave some unexcavated material in place to protect the archaeology during the reconstruction process. Despite these precautions, we must assume that some of the heavy machinery used for the excavation and reconstruction probably damaged and in places even reburied the archaeological layers. This holds true for all of the spaces under investigation. This means that we cannot always assume the validity of the surface as representing the actual level of the AD 79 eruption. Okay, could you please? Okay, thank you. In the case of the courtyard, once we removed this accumulation, we recovered a pavement that was uniquely suited to the function of the building as a wine distribution center. Workers laid a thick mixture of concrete, amphorae, and basalt boulders to support the heavy cart traffic passing through the area. After recording, we partially removed the pavement to investigate deeper into the history of the site. This effort allowed us to recover the remains of a trench which workers had dug in antiquity to accommodate the foundations of the colonnade. Sorry, I think we should be still back here. Could we go back one? Yeah, sorry. Since the later pavement clearly sealed off excuse me, the construction trench, the artifacts contained within allow us to date the first construction of the central courtyard. Our estimate so far indicates that the construction of the peristyle colonnade occurred roughly in the mid-2nd century BC, or about 230 years before the eruption. One of the principal reasons we decided to open the unit in this particular area of the courtyard and to investigate it more deeply was the result of a deep anomaly recorded in our ERT survey. What happened after that reminded us that we should treat evidence from such surveys with some caution. In this instance, the data indicated a series of shallow layers concentrated in a particular area. We were inclined to think that they belonged to a well or a cistern that slowly silted up in antiquity. You can imagine our surprise when we discovered that the layers had actually nothing to do with the Roman building. The anomaly turned out to be a series of much earlier Bronze Age occupation levels buried by successive eruptions between 1700 and 1000 BC. Buried beneath the fallout from the latest eruption was one of our more spectacular finds, a perfectly preserved surface with plow and sled marks dating to the late Bronze Age. Although its importance is undisputed, we have since decided to leave the Bronze Age archaeology undisturbed and to pursue our work in the Roman phases of the complex. Nevertheless, our initial foray into the Bronze Age has produced an interesting observation. We have noted many foundations in both Villa A and Oplontis B rest directly on layers of hardened volcanic ash produced by pyroclastic flows. It seems that Roman engineers actively sought out such layers almost as a natural form of concrete to stabilize the buildings. It was only in the last few seasons that we uncovered clear evidence for earlier construction phases. In this slide, you see 3 wall foundations marked in red that we recovered in an evaluation trench on the south side of the site. They once formed 4 spaces likely associated with the first version of the courtyard complex. A later sewer, which you see in the center, cut through the walls. In nearby room 49, we recovered the remains from that same era of a concrete foundation wall that included 3 stone-faced piers which likely supported the columns of a portico-like structure. 2 of them were at the head cross walls, marked here in red, that once formed separate rooms. In a second phase, engineers raised these structures and built the later foundation wall you see here to cut through the previous portico. 2 water channels uncovered in the same unit are also associated with this phase. A main channel, complete with a closing mechanism, aligned in a north-south direction, whereas a subsidiary channel diverted to the west at a right angle. For now, the function of the spaces and the channels is unclear, but the lack of elaborate pavements or further ornamentation suggests that they were utilitarian. The channels uncovered in room 49 were part of a broader system added in the second phase of the complex, an event that must have influenced its daily function. Several units excavated in the courtyard area exposed a network of water channels, collection basins, cisterns, and drains. Unit 11, excavated on the western side of the peristyle, displayed 2 channels set at a perpendicular angle. One of them included a small settling tank that workers filled in with debris when the channel went out of use in antiquity. This channel headed toward a redistribution tank recovered in Unit 3 to the east that also collected rainwater from the courtyard and wastewater from an adjacent amphora washing facility. In contrast to the blocked-up channel coming in from the west, this facility seemed to be partially working at the time of the eruption. This combined evidence suggests that some sort of dramatic event partially disrupted the water supply in antiquity, an event that led to an overhaul of the water supply system, at least to part of it. This trench displayed further evidence concerning the construction and abandonment of a water feature. The unit examined a wellhead on the north side of the peristyle. The well was undoubtedly part of the original courtyard. Workers had deliberately carved the tough blocks of the foundation supporting the colonnade to match the curvature of the shaft. Safety reasons prevented us from fully excavating the well. It simply continued too deeply for us to keep working. Nonetheless, we were able to show that the well was filled up in antiquity, mostly with soil and occasional fragments of architectural debris and pottery. The absence of any sort of lining suggests that workers may have removed it or that it was fashioned in perishable materials that have since decomposed. The closing of the well may simply signal that it went out of use after the construction of the running water system. Our results from elsewhere suggest something entirely more dramatic. In 2014, we examined a large undocumented hole cut into the floor of storage rooms 41 and 17. It marks the spot where the floor and walls above had collapsed into an underground cistern during the eruption. At 2 by 1.5 meters, the cistern is massive, running some 30 meters to the west. Clearly, a structure this large served a thriving settlement, but it was abandoned in antiquity. The partition wall dividing spaces 41 and 17 above it cuts through the cistern, indicating that it went out of use after the construction of the southern storage spaces, in an event which we tentatively date to after the mid-1st century AD. The evidence points to a partial disruption in the water system and a shift in the function of the complex with the construction of the barrel-vaulted storage rooms in its third main phase. These are the storage rooms. They all have barrel-vaulted ceilings. The reason for this change is likely associated with the earthquakes and geological phenomena that devastated the area after AD 62. Bradycism in particular may be to blame. This is a well-known occurrence in volcanic areas where the filling or emptying of magma chambers can lead to landscapes shifting several meters up and down in a relatively short period of time. Giovanni Di Maio has documented a drastic lowering of the terrain after or in conjunction with the events of AD 62, the earthquake. Geological phenomena such as Bradycism and the earthquake likely lowered the complex, which was already close to sea level, so much that the cistern and well became contaminated with seawater, rendering them unusable. The barrel vaults on the south side of the complex, therefore, seem to be a response to the changing environment. In contrast to established notions positing regional economic decline after the earthquake, the new storage rooms at Oplontis B signal a renewed economic development in the years leading up to the eruption. At this point, it would be easy to associate the system of channels built in the second phase at Oplontis B with the Serino aqueduct built in the Augustan period to supply Pompeii and the Bay of Naples. However, unlike the Serino aqueduct, this system at Oplontis B partially survived the disruptions of AD 62. Italian excavation diaries document the recovery of a series of water pipes throughout the complex. We also have evidence of functioning latrines and that the water collector in Unit 3 continued to operate, albeit only partially. These circumstances suggest the presence of a smaller local, even site-specific water system or aqueduct, drawn perhaps from the slopes of Vesuvius above. Nevertheless, despite the continued activity, some areas were still struggling with the after effects of seismic activity at the time of the eruption. On the western side of our site, our excavations in Space 18 encountered raised walls, a rubbed-out floor, and a large pit filled with eruption lapilli, suggesting that this area was still under construction at the time of the eruption. Similar evidence comes from the row of townhouses on the north side of the site. These were independent structures that underwent their own micro-development. Each building is no more than a lower room accessed directly from the street, with an upper room used as sleeping quarters. The buildings stand out because they follow a coherent and repetitive design in similar fashion to modern townhouses. Their layout also resembles typical tabernae shops, such as this Taberna 5 in Herculaneum, where the lower floor was dedicated to commercial activities, whereas the upper floor held the sleeping quarters. Although they likely began as commercial structures, the structures at Oplontis B seem to lack such a defined commercial purpose in their final phase. Instead, the units were complete with household shrines, stairwells, exterior street benches, and a private latrine, indicating their primary domestic use at the time of the eruption. We excavated Townhouse 46 because it displayed two architectural phases in a door that was walled up in antiquity. The space displayed evidence for two earlier phases, including the foundation of a demolished partition wall. However, in its third and final phase, the house lacked a defined floor. Instead, a series of pits dug in antiquity indicate that the space was being refurbished before the eruption. This brings us to the final phase of the complex. One of the primary goals of our investigation is to document, analyze, and preserve the material culture uncovered in the complex. During the excavation and reconstruction effort conducted between 1974 and the 1990s, workers recovered a variety of materials, including the remains of the 52 individuals that had sought shelter in one of the barrel-vaulted storage rooms that you see here. Piles of amphorae were stacked up in the corner of the courtyard. Other materials include organic, metal, and architectural materials, some of which are in the show. There was wooden fencing, pomegranates, pitch, coins, jewelry, bronze vessels, wall painting fragments, marble flooring revetments, and ceramics, not just amphorae, but cooking and tableware. And those are the famous amphorae stacked up in the corner. Jenny Muslin has led the effort to catalog the previously excavated materials at Oplontis B. This has proven to be quite the challenge. The materials are collectively stored in over 702 crates, each of which has to be photographed, inventoried, and described before we can start studying their contents. So far, the team has also cataloged over 1,400 amphorae, which were stored at the time of the eruption site, ready to be filled and shipped. Over 90% of these were produced locally and are of the Dressel 2-4 type, a particular sort of amphora typically reserved for the transportation of wine. The team documented many tituli picti. Sorry, we'll go back to that one. Could we go back? Thank you. In red, black, and white pigment painted on the shoulders and the necks of the amphora. Typically, these inscriptions specified particular information, such as the origin, destination, and product the amphorae contained. Their study can shed more light on the trade networks at the time of the eruption. The team also documented a series of tegulae mammatae, which are large tiles, a type of tile used in the heating of spaces, along with other roof tiles and brick that suggest the presence of a bath or heated room in the complex. The discovery of wall revetments, doors and windowsills, flooring and pilasters in white and red marble indicate the upper floor of the courtyard was more luxurious than previously considered. Although we are just starting to study these materials, our discoveries are already supplying a vivid picture of Oplontis B in the centuries and decades prior to its destruction by Vesuvius. In conclusion, if we are to suggest any parallels between Villa A and Oplontis B, then it is clear that both sites flourished with at least 3 phases of development between the mid-2nd century BC and AD 79. Although the two sites have different histories and functions, there are some similarities. After the construction of a first core, both sides saw the addition of a water system which altered the function of many spaces. Also, the construction of the east wing at Villa A and the storage facilities at Oplontis B are roughly contemporaneous events. However, there are also differences. Oplontis B is roughly 100 years older than Villa A. Its many refurbishments are a testament to a thriving settlement. Also, Oplontis B continued to prosper at the time of the eruption and rebuilding was in progress. By contrast, Villa A seems to have lain abandoned, having never recovered from the effects of the earthquake. Certainly, Strabo's description of a patchwork of sites on the bay helps explain such separate developments. Each owner had different priorities. Nevertheless, our two complexes suggest that the reestablishment of trade and economic recovery took precedence over the pursuit of luxury. Two further observations are of importance. Geological phenomena such as bradycism seem more widespread in the Bay of Naples than previously assumed, dramatically affecting the local landscape within a few kilometers. Also, Oplontis B seems to have enjoyed its own water system, despite the proximity of the Sereno aqueduct. These factors complicate our view on the development of the region from a monolithic picture to an array of sites, each with its own micro-durations. The overall development of Villa A and Oplontis B occurred in a period when the Bay of Naples became increasingly urbanized with the construction of numerous luxury villas and the expansion of settlements. This was also a period of upheaval as Pompeii became a colony and the Republic gave way to empire. Our sites respond to these developments in ways that we are just beginning to understand. Our future task is to use our data to further expand our window on the changing settlement pattern and socio-economic development of the ancient Bay of Naples. Thank you.